Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Red Mage Creative, and what we're going to be looking at today is how to incorporate state machines into a project that gets growing and increasingly complex. So, a state machine allows you to take your code and break it up by chunk. That way, you can have a lot of different states or things your objects, players, enemies can do, like run around, be idle, jump, be able to shoot, melee, dodge, shoot in the air, and be able to change between these while changing sprites and data really nicely and seamlessly. It also allows you to expand and grow your game very quickly, which is a fantastic thing as you work on a game. So this project will be available to download if you just want to take a look at it and just play with it yourself. But I'm going to show you how I've got this working with a really quick overview, and then we'll actually add a new state or a new ability for the player to slide, and I'll show you exactly how that works to move in and out of a state really seamlessly. The sprites that I'm using are this one right here, the Elemental Leaf one. I've got it linked in the notes in the project if you want to grab it right here. All right, let's dive in. So at the create event for my player, I've got all the normal data you would expect for a platformer. So I can move with speeds, I can jump and fall. I've got rolling in here. I do have a state, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then I've got some extra data to move between my states, and I've broken up most of the functionality for this game into functions that I can call at different points. So this one right here, this check on ground, well, it applies gravity and if we're not on the ground itself. So oftentimes you'll see this done in the step event where you want it to be. But with a state machine, you actually want to call this in different separate states. Not every single state is actually going to pull the player down and apply gravity. And so sometimes I want to have that functionality and other times I don't. Same thing over here. So I can check for X collisions, check if an animation has finished, set the terminal velocity, which simply means the maximum falling speed, and then I can decide if the player is able to move left and right with this function right here. So all I've done is just break down this code, and that way I can call it wherever I want. So the bulk of the code, though, lives inside of this step event, and I have it all inside of regions that are labeled. So I have idle, start, moving, falling, landing, so on and so forth. Each one of these regions contains code that allows me to check if a certain condition is met. So if I'm in an idle state, so let's load up my game to show you. If I'm in my idle state, the sprite that should be playing is actually the idle sprite. But you might notice that if we look at this code, it actually doesn't say that anywhere inside of here. And that's because every single time we move into a new state, we're actually going to change the sprite here in this function, which is this one right here. So moving between a state, that is when we alter the sprite. That is when we alter the image index. That way it only occurs one time. Because if you have ever moved between idle and running or jumping, you'll know that you have to do some hoops to make sure that you are on the right image index, that you're playing the right sprite at the right point, and so on. This, as a state machine, eliminates most of that frustration. So, if I'm in my idle state right here, let's go back up and take a look at what state even is. State is an enum, which is an enumerator, and all that means is I can write out my state names with names right here, and then actually access them with the code state dot. This just means I make sure I always get it right, instead of messing up a typo or something somewhere along the way, okay? If I'm in my current state, which is idle, I'm always in my current state. If I'm in idle, I can decide what the player can do, because the player should not be able to fall if they're in idle state. Well, actually, that's a terrible example because we can fall. Let's say in idle state, we don't want to be able to do certain things. Like maybe we don't want to be able to slide the new one we're going to add in idle. We only want to be able to do that while we're moving. If we are doing a ranged attack, we don't want to be able to be moving. We can completely control all of those inside of each and every state. So in the idle state, the code that's in here primarily checks to see what state I'm going to go to next. So if I'm idle and I press left or right on my keyboard, I'm going to change my state into running and set that sprite right here. If I jump, then I'm going to start jumping. If I click the roll button, I'm going to begin rolling, and I'm immediately going to set my Y speed just one time, and then the state will take care of moving the player the rest of the way. Same thing for falling and ranged attack and melee attack, which I didn't leave a comment. So all of these are for changing states. The only other code inside of idle is to check that I'm on the ground. And if I'm not, well, then I'm going to increase my Y by my Y speed. And as soon as I do that, this state will kick in later. So let's say I am on a block and that block vanishes while I'm in idle state. If this disappears, well, I'm no longer standing on something, so I'm going to start falling. And as soon as I start falling, as soon as my Y speed isn't 0, I'm actually going to transition into the fall state, which is why that's there in the first place. All right. Now, let's take a look at what it looks like to actually add a state inside of here. So the first thing we have to do is give it a name. I'm going to call the state sliding. So by putting it in here, I can now access it by just typing state.sliding. That way I always get it right. So sliding. Next, you have to choose when you want to be able to do this. I do not want to be able to slide in from my idle state. I can dodge from my idle state, but sliding seems like you'd have to be running first. So I'm going to come down here to running and open this up. So this state has a little more code, but realistically, not that much more. I'm checking to see what I can do inside of my running state, if I press left or right, whatever. But I'm going to add inside of here at the bottom. So I check for rolling, ranged, melee attack. So these are all of the changing state options. Because if I'm running, I'm allowed to jump, I'm allowed to roll, I'm allowed to fall, all of those things. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say sliding, else if I press, oh, I don't have a key to be able to slide. So first we have to implement that up here. So the controls might not be the best, but that's okay. I'm just going to say var slide equals mouse check button pressed MB middle. So I'll use the middle mouse button to enable sliding. So while I'm running, if I press slide, I'm going to change my state to state.sliding, and the sprite I want is SPR Archer slide. This function, again, is going to take care of actually changing the current state we're in, changing my sprite, and changing my image index. So it's really nice when you start breaking your code up into functions like this, because then you can just call it and it takes care of pretty much everything else I need. Now, in my slide state, if I want to change anything, like let's say I wanted to immediately increase my X speed, right? Because I can move right here, so I can control X, I can go left and right. But let's say I want to multiply my movement by 2. This will occur one time, because as soon as I call this, this code will run, this will happen, and then I'm no longer going to be in this if statement. I'm going to leave it so I can put code in there that will only run one time, which is a huge benefit of the state machine. If you've ever tried to run code one time, you know you have to just play around and fiddle with a bunch of if checks. State machines take care of that because it actually moves you to a completely different section of your code. Now, I do not have, oh, I do have a region for sliding. Look at that. So I'll end this region here, and we'll come in here and we're going to say else if, and the only reason I can say that is because all through here I'm just checking like that. So that's why I'm saying else if. In each of my regions, that's how I start it. So if my current state is equal to state.sliding. Then this is the only code that my player is going to run. Everything else up here will not be checked. So I have to make the decision of exactly what will be checked. So if I'm sliding, the first thing I want to do is check, well, when am I done sliding? So if I open up my slide sprite and I press play, this is what it looks like. It looks pretty nice. I want to move with it, so that looks great. Okay, so I'm going to say if my function animation over. So this will return true if I have reached the end of the animation, otherwise it is false. So if I have reached the end of my sliding, I'm actually going to return to my previous state. And this works because I expect that I had to be running for 1 and that I want to keep running. So in my running state, if I come back to here immediately, if I'm holding left or right, I continue moving, no problem. If I release left or right, I'm going to go back to idle. Now, this specifically could cause an issue. So let's go ahead and instead of just saying this right here, let's add one more check. So I'm going to say if I'm pressing left or right, then I know I want to continue running. So we'll return to my previous state. That's fine. If I'm not holding left or right, I don't want to keep moving. So I'm going to say change state, state dot idle, and put my idle sprite. So I can keep running and I'll return to that state, or I'll go back to idle. And I need to continue moving because right now that will actually work. So if I come in here, I will slide and I'll change and I can keep running and move back to idle and blah, blah, blah. But I don't move. And the reason I don't move is because this is the only code that's running. So down here, I actually want to move / slide across the ground. And if I'm going to do that, I have to increase my X. And if I do that, I now slide. And that looks really nice. Now, there is no collision checking happening yet, which means if I go here, I'll just go straight through any wall because I must check for collisions. So I have a function for that, and I want to do it, so there it is. Now, I will not run through that, so that's all good. Now I have to consider, can I slide off a ledge? Well, sure looks like it, and that makes a lot of sense for my functionality. So I'm going to say actually we're going to say check on ground, because what this is going to do is actually increase this, and then it calls this one, and we're setting our Y speed here, but we don't actually change our Y. So I'm going to, after this, say Y plus equal Y speed. So now, if I run off to the side, I'll actually start falling. And I transition into the falling animation because I am falling. So that's actually perfect. And that right there is how you add a new state. You choose exactly what you want. So return to idle or running, and then I'm moving here. So if you made a state where you didn't want to have gravity pulling you down, like is the case when I'm jumping and shooting here, I actually completely stop checking gravity. I can still move and I'll continue moving after I get done with it, but in the air ranged attack, I don't check or move the player at all. That is my choice, and you can change it if you wanted to do something different. But the thing is, this region of code is completely isolated from everywhere else. And that is the huge benefit of a state machine. Because if anything doesn't work inside of your state that you transition into, you know exactly where it has gone wrong. I know if I have a bug when I am sliding, it is either when I am sliding or when I'm changing into my slide state, which I know I can only do while I'm running, which is right here, or it's in my slide state, which is right here. There's no guessing about where the bug is, and it's really easy to track down and fix. So, state machines allow you a tremendous amount of flexibility because I can continue adding more and more regions and sections and states inside of here with confidence, knowing that my idle, my jumping, my shooting all works without glitch because I've already got it working. And if I add another state, let's say for death, I am just going to work on that state and moving in and out of it. That's all that I have to work on, which is fantastic. So, if you have any questions on state machines, let me know. I'd love to hear it. If you've got a really great project that you're building and you've incorporated state machines, share it. I'd love to either hear about the project or even see it or play it. So, let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. And that's what I got for you. Thanks for joining me. And as always, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later.